Rachel Mott.
And I'm Dr. Katarina Guzman.
And we're here today to tell you about the tale of Bluebeard.
Yes, a very interesting fairy tale. Definitely one of the more adult ones. It does not spare any details. And both of us came across this fairy tale when we were younger, but it didn't really hook either of us, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I didn't forget about it entirely.
Yeah.
But never really resonated with me as a kid. So different experience coming across it as an adult.
Yes. I think it was a lot more meaningful, honestly, as an adult, for me too. So I feel like Bluebeard is one of those stories that a lot of people know the gist of it. But there are a lot of different versions too. So we are going to briefly do an outline of the version that we read, which is in Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. An awesome book, highly recommend it. And she has a whole chapter about Bluebeard, the symbols in Bluebeard, and other things which we'll talk about today. So, to start
us out, the main character is sort of a naive young female. She is a sister.
Yeah, and she's the youngest, so that's important. So she has two older sisters, and she's the youngest. And this man comes along basically courting them.
Right, but he's got this blue beard, and in the story, the blue beard is symbolic of something kind of it's like gross, like.
And something that is, I think that we've all had this experience where we kind of notice that something's not right. But oftentimes we will, which is what happens in the story, we rationalize it and we say, well, what's so bad about it? You know, there must, okay, maybe I just felt a little weird about it, but it's not that bad.
So from the start, all the sisters, Bluebeard courts all of them.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, something weird about this blue-bearded guy. But then he proceeds to basically wine and dine the entire family.
And he's very rich and he's very charming. So that's the other thing is that, and another interesting thing I thought was that one of the versions of Bluebeard, it was sort of rewritten around a time where a beard was very abnormal to wear. To have. And so not only was it blue, but it was a blue beard. And so that was kind of also another sign that it was like, this is a little off. But anyways, going back to the story, he brings them out, gives them food, basically very charming. And then when they get back home, the two older sisters are still a little hesitant about him. And both of them are like, I would never marry him. We're just not sure about this guy. But the youngest one basically decides, well, he must not be that bad.
Right. So she goes ahead and marries him. And then we kind of can skip ahead to the next main event of the story, which is when Bluebeard first goes away and leaves her alone in his estate.
And so he has a huge house, big castle, and he gives her the keys to all of the doors in the house. And he tells her, this is an important part of the story, he tells her that you can go into whatever room you want. Here are the keys.
Right.
You have free reign. Except.
Right, and I wanted to read the quote of what he says about this one little key. This little one here, it is the key of the closet at the end of the great gallery on the ground floor. Open them all, go into all and every one of them except that little closet, which I forbid you, and forbid it in such a manner that if you happen to open it, there's nothing but what you may expect from my just anger and resentment.
So that's scary.
Yeah, it's pretty clear foreshadowing of if you go into it, shit's gonna hit the fan.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that he gives her that key.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a huge part where
Right.
you think
Right.
if you don't want someone to go into a room, you don't give them the means to get into it. So that's like a very interesting, it's almost like tempting.
Of
Like,
course.
Here you go, but
Right, and we drew a parallel here to Pandora's box, where she
Yeah.
also has the key to opening the box that she's forbidden to open. So, yeah, there's
Yeah.
something inevitable there. And of course, while he's away, her sisters come and visit, and they even egg her on.
they want to know
Yes.
what's in this room.
And they end up opening the room.
Yes, and in the room is a very, very gruesome scene. Basically, it's the mutilated bodies of his past wives. They're horrified, obviously. They rush out of the room, they shut the door, they lock it, and what ends up happening is that the wife notices that the key has blood on it. Or in some versions, the key is literally bleeding.
Yeah.
And so she's trying to get the blood off. She does everything she can to scrub it off, and it just won't stop bleeding. And in one of the versions, it says that it even bled through her entire, she puts it in her wardrobe, and it bled through all of her clothes.
Yeah.
It's like she could, at that point, she can't hide
There's no
what
way
she
she's
saw.
going to be able to hide the fact that she's seen it now.
Yeah.
So when he comes back, she tries to like put it away. She tries to like not show him the key right away, but of course he eventually uncovers and
He knows.
yeah.
So he decides, well, his wrath is basically taken out on her. He's gonna kill her. And then she gets very smart at this point. And she goes, wait, let me first go up to my room and prepare myself and pray before you're gonna kill me, basically. Like, let me compose myself. And he says, okay. He lets her go upstairs. And at this point, there are a few different versions, but she gets word to her brothers or her brother-in-laws.
It's either her brothers or her brother-in-laws, depending on the version, but she like, yeah, she's able to send out word to be rescued, essentially, and she holds off Bluebeard just long enough by telling him she's, gathering herself, her composure, and etc.
Just at the point where he is dragging her to the little room, the brothers rush in, and they don't ask any questions. They know exactly what's going on, and they basically bring him outside and they murder him. They just do away with him. Yeah, I think that this version literally says they like cut him to pieces.
Yeah, it's very violent. I mean, the scene before they show up, he's dragging her by the hair or whatever,
Yeah.
and then they show up and cut him to pieces. So that is the end of the story.
And she's rescued. And then in some versions, this one doesn't, it just leaves it at that he's killed, but in some versions, she's left with his fortune. And so she's basically rich now. Like, she's free, she's rich, she can do whatever she wants.
Yeah.
And so I think at this part, it's good to say that we are basically looking at these fairy tales from more of a Jungian perspective. And so what that means is that all of these characters are symbols of our own psyche.
So that's when Bluebeard becomes interesting, is when you consider him as, instead of just this isolated figure outside of yourself, a violent person, you recognize that impulse, which is called in this book, Women Who Run with Wolves, it's called the natural predator.
Yes, so she talks about how Bluebeard is this part of ourselves, which she calls the natural predator, which wants to destroy all of our dreams. The wife in here is basically symbolic of more the feminine aspect in all of us, which is very creative.
It's like
very
the fertile.
instinctual. Yeah.
There's like
That birth, it's the ability to give birth to our creative dreams, our aspirations, our passion in life, like our pursuit of that purpose.
And the opposition to that is the natural predator, that the impulse to destroy.
Yes, the impulse to control that, to destroy that. And if you think about it, like what Clarissa Pinkola Estes talks about is I mean, just think about that universal voice in our head that is always telling us, no, you're not good enough for that. Or, okay, that's a little too weird. People aren't gonna like that. I think all of us can relate with that. I mean, since we were kids.
Right. The naysayer.
The naysayer, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what's interesting is that sometimes other people hold that for us.
Right.
And what that means is that a lot of times other people are the ones telling us, okay, that's weird. Why would you do that? Or no, you can't do that. That's not going to work. And so that's basically the symbol of Bluebeard too. And it's kind of projected out into other people. But the thing that happens in Bluebeard will happen with that as well, which is that oftentimes we're like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's not going to work. Okay, I guess I'll just do this, what I've been doing for a while. And that is what we don't want to happen. This is kind of, this Bluebeard story is showing us how we can be free of
Right.
that.
Like in summary, we, in Bluebeard, we're given the key to the place where we face that part of ourselves down.
Yeah.
And we are given the option, okay, here's the key, you know it's there, you could ignore it, maybe, and never think about it and go on, but it won't change the fact that it's there. This is a little roundabout way of telling it, but you know, she's given the key and she has the intuition that something's off with Bluebeard. And if she had chosen not to go into the room, she would have befallen the same fate as the previous wives.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, in order for us to get to that point where we can like realize that allow that fertile creativity to survive and not squash it, we have to go into the room and face it. Face the squasher.
Face the squasher. Okay, that's such an amazing way of saying it. And I feel like that's literally exactly what you said is that's the basis of the story, basically.
Yeah.
In a nutshell.
Yeah.
And so I want to read this quote about what the key could be in our own lives. The key is obviously a symbol, and it's obviously a tool that opens up that part of our psyche so that we can see it for what it is, a destructive, basically a destroyer of our dreams. And she talks about how questions can serve as those keys. She says, asking the proper question is the central action of transformation in fairy tales, in analysis, and in individuation. The key question causes germination of consciousness. Questions are the keys that cause the secret doors of the psyche to swing open. So I see this as when you start questioning things about your own mental patterns, about the patterns that you see happening in your life, that can open those needed doors in your psyche. Just the questions.
Yeah, I think about inquiry, the inquiry of like, I have this thought, is it a true thought? Is this true?
Yes. Is this true? Those can be really powerful. Someone told me recently that it's not even, oftentimes we think of asking questions, we ask questions to find the answers. That's what we think of. But somebody presented the idea to me recently, which was, well, it's not actually the answers, it's the question themselves. Because the questions are what make us consider that there's a different possibility. There's a different perspective for something. So it can kind of like just set you on a different trajectory in your life. I like that. So the key was one of the things that we really wanted to talk about. What was the other thing that we wanted to make sure that we
wanted to talk about intuition.
Yeah.
Which we kind of have been getting at.
So I think bringing up intuition is important as well because when I was reading a little bit about the history of Bluebeard, I actually think it was in this book that she mentions it, that there have been speculations about Bluebeard being a story that's basically saying, oh, you don't want to be too curious because look what's going to happen. You're going to find, these dead bodies, so just don't even be, don't be curious about anything.
I think it's the opposite.
It is, yeah.
Like,
it is the opposite, because like you said, if she had not been curious and looked into that room, it doesn't make that disappear.
Right.
It doesn't make his tendencies of violence disappear. It's still there, it's just that you turned a blind eye to it.
yes.
And so that's where the intuition, I think, comes in too, which is that the older sisters, well, all of the sisters had an intuitive feeling about him from the beginning because of his blue beard.
Yes. And it's the young, naive one who's able to ignore that or put that aside, and then the key is like another opportunity for her to actually listen.
Yeah.
And it's irresistible.
Yeah. So the intuition is important because the two older sisters kind of symbolize a more mature feminine intuition, I guess you could say. And so that's why one of the reasons that in a lot of the versions, the sisters are there with the younger sister, basically being like, no, we should look in that room. No, like, what is it? What actually is there? Why aren't you allowed into it?
You basically beg her to let them into it.
Yeah. And then I think the other part of intuition in this story is when she buys time.
Yes. Yes.
And she knows, she acts on an intuitive thought when she goes, no, wait, let me prepare myself. And she's basically waits, and it's a very courageous thing to do, because she has faith that the brothers will come. She has faith that something will come. Again, we're looking at this as the brothers being other aspects of ourselves, that there will be something there that we can lean on to something that's more aggressive. I would say it's like boundaries. But in order for her to do that, I mean, she needs to figure out a way to buy time. And so she does that.
Yeah. I think there's something powerful to how, the relationship between the young girl and Bluebeard, he seems like a very powerful, dominant figure that she's sort of forced to partially submit to throughout the whole story. Like, she kind of was like, oh yeah, I'll marry you, and oh, okay, I won't go in the room. But then in the little ways that she's able to, she's disobedient.
Yeah.
And she uses her cleverness in buying time of okay, I'm gonna use what I have. Like, she's kind of appealing to whatever his sort of pedestalizing of women, or what, if that's what it is in my mind at least. I'm unsure, but she uses what she has to to have some kind of strength in opposition to him.
Yes, I really like that. This is another quote that I think is really beautiful, that sort of wraps up what the story is about. When the soulful life is being threatened, it is not only acceptable to draw the line and mean it, it is required. When I hear this quote, I think of boundaries, really, and that ability that we, in order for us to protect our inner, basically, dreams, our pursuit of our purpose in life, we have to have, at some point, the ability to rise up and to draw the line and to mean it, to say, no, I'm gonna do this, and you follow through with it.
Yeah, right. It's it's much easier, I think, to think about it in terms of another person. Like, oh yeah, I won't let someone tell me that my idea is a bad idea ever again. But with yourself, that's a little more
It's
difficult.
trickier.
You have to hear that pattern and realize, oh, I'm putting myself down again.
Yeah.
I'm disempowering myself.
Yeah.
And then say, no, I'm gonna do the opposite. This to wrap this story up, like it's again and again, I think a reminder to stand up to use your power in the ways that you can.
Yes. And part of that is be curious, because obviously I think this is what's so deceptive, is that a lot of times we hear these voices that we're saying about ourselves. You know, there are some voices that serve a purpose of getting us to question things about our lives, which is good. They can be like constructive criticism, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just destructive criticism. And so being able to discern those, I think, is where the questions come in.
Yeah.
The key comes
Ask questions.
in. Yeah, like ask questions, be curious.
Be curious, folks. We'll leave you with
watching.
that. Thank you for watching. I'm Dr. Ray.
And I'm Dr. Katarina, and until next time.
Until next time.